Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Achieve Idealliance G7 Qualification through X-Rite. Presenting today is Mark Gunlock, a Solutions Architect at X-Rite. I'm Robert Grotans, the Global Digital Learning Manager, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. I just want to go over a couple of things before we get started today. Due to the number of people that are attending today's webinar, we will keep everyone muted. If you have any questions during today's presentation, please use the questions function on the GoToWebinar panel, and we will have some time at the very end to answer a few of those questions. Finally, this webinar will be recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email after this webinar with a link to the recording, so you will be able to watch this webinar again. So I will turn it over to Mark to get things started.
Okay, so we'll get started. So today's topic is how to achieve Idealliance G7 Qualification through X-Rite. So let's figure out what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about first what is the G7 Master Training and Qualification? What are the benefits and importance of G7 Qualification? The process you're going to go through for qualification and for re-qualification, and how X-Rite can help you with your needs. And of course, we'll wrap it up with a question and answer session at the end. So first, this is a 3-level qualification program created by Idealliance that is granted to print providers that demonstrate that they can produce calibrated print output. X-Rite has a team of Idealliance G7 certified experts that can deliver the training and assist you in the process of qualification. G7 provides consistency and efficiency through predictable color from your proofs to your digital presses and your conventional presses like your offset or flexo. The goal is to reduce the amount of time, ink, and materials used during your make ready, because that just costs money. Also, it's very critical that we're able to align color across various presses, substrates, and inks. So ultimately, it's easier to meet and maintain the color expectations from press run to press run and across different types of print technology. So let's talk about some basics. So a lot of calibrations done prior to G7 were all built around TVI or dot gain calibrations. And that is important because TVI influences the images more than solid density does. And this is impacted through, say, ink viscosity, impression, plate curves, and other controllable factors. What you see here on the screen, on the left side is what the image should look like. That was the intention. On the right side, we have a case where we hit the solid ink densities on our production. We measured our CMYK solids and they were right on the money. However, on the top, you see what happens when the TVI is high and the bottom when it's low, that really the picture is mostly impacted by the tone value increase, okay? Because images are built out of tints. So check out these two images. In these cases here, also hitting, in this case, the same solid ink densities and the same TVI, but they don't match. Why is that? Well, you can see the 50-40-40 patch there represents the mid-tone gray balance patch that is a combination of the tint values for your cyan, magenta, and yellow. And if you look on the right side, it has quite a color cast to it. On the left side, it's fairly neutral. And this is because with gray balance calibration, we will actually adjust the tone curves on your plates to balance those to produce a neutral gray that more closely matches that 50% black patch that's just to the right of that patch. The plate curves are adjusted to compensate for press conditions so that the print job files don't need to be adjusted for the press. This P2P target is printed, then it's measured to calculate the curve corrections for that press, plate, ink, and substrate that are used for production. Presses will target the values for a selected standard, or what's known as a calibrated reference print condition, also known as a CRPC for short. The digital proofer uses a CRPC ICC profile to match that same standard. Swap and Grackle are two commonly used CRPCs, and there are other conditions with smaller and larger gamuts. These CRPCs are based on neutral print density calibration and are not dependent on a press type. The same CRPC can be used for an offset press, a flexo press, a digital device, pretty much any kind of CMYK printing system. This helps to manage changes. When the presses are not calibrated to a CRPC, every press can be different. Moving a job from another press to another press can get kind of messy. In worst cases, you may need to make a new fingerprint run and possibly re-separate the files to print correctly on the press. The G7 workflow allows for more flexibility. For example, if my press is calibrated to Grackle or Swap or any other CRPC, then proofs can be made using that same CRPC ICC profile to match that press. And the job files can be built using the same CRPC instead of a custom profile for every printer or press. So for the G7 qualification process, what X-Rite's going to do is they're going to work with you to evaluate your existing workflow and identify areas that you can improve. We're going to train your pre-press staff on G7 plate calibration and proofing color management. We're going to work with your press room operators to achieve G7 compliant process control. And we're going to help you submit your test prints to Idealliance to receive your qualification. Let's take a look at some of the details of what the qualifications look like. So first of all, there's the G7 Master Grayscale qualification. This is the basic level of qualification, and it's going to work pretty much with any print process, and it only requires matching gray balance and tone values. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So there's this concept of neutral print density curves, or NPDC. And these are the calibrations. These are the target values we're shooting for to achieve neutral print density using CMY and, of course, the K. So all the calibrations that we do are going to share this same neutral print density in the highlight range. So any press we're working on, if you look at the tone values of our gray balance patches in the highlights all the way up to 25, they're going to look pretty much identical. They're targeting the same neutral print density values. Then the tone curves are adjusted to the press condition's maximum neutral density for the K and for the CMY separately. So you see the curves, a wide range of curves that you see illustrated here, okay, would represent how the density curves would vary depending on the maximum density that press is capable of. So if you're working with a print process that can achieve a very high maximum neutral print density, your curve would follow this path here. And if it has a very low, say like a newsprint kind of scenario, that curve is going to follow a line along here. But again, just to reiterate, in the highlights, you'll notice here, these are identical. They only vary after the 25% point going out to the maximum. So this provides a very similar appearance in the highlights. And then as we move out into the shadows, it will get lighter for lighter, lower density kind of situations like newsprint. But if you're printing on a high quality coated sheet that holds ink very well and you can hold high densities, it will get darker, but always neutral. The density may be a bit different, but it will still maintain neutrality throughout the range. So for the qualification, they've got a nice simple target to do a verification. These are really all the patches that they look at for the grayscale qualification. This target, we're actually going to focus only on these patches here, which represent the builds of just the black channel, okay, printed just tints of black, versus builds of CMY to try to achieve a neutral gray. So in a perfect world, both of these ramps would be nearly identical. Now they're going to be a little different, but they're all within tolerance. Now you note that we also, in this target, we're printing our CMY and our RGB overprints, but for grayscale qualification, we actually don't look at those. We're only looking at achieving good gray ramps throughout your production. The next level up is what's called G7 Master Targeted. Now this level considers color matching of the solids and the overprints as well. So here's where we get into those CRPCs that I spoke of earlier. Idealliance did a lot of testing, looking at existing print standards out there for newsprint and a variety of other conditions, and recognized that the primary colors, the CMY, and the overprint colors all pretty much follow the same hue angle, very close, very similar hue angles on all these different print conditions. So really it was just a matter of scaling the gamut up or down to the type of press you're running on to achieve a standard. So the idea is that when we do your calibration, we're going to run your press to one of these 7 characterized reference print conditions. We're going to make small substrate adjustments. So we're going to take into account the color of your substrate that will move these standards a bit relative to that color. So if your substrate's a little bluer or a little more yellow, it actually will adjust the targets for the standards. The CMYK and the RGB targets will be adjusted based on the paper color. And then the plates are G7 calibrated, as we spoke of a moment ago, to get that neutral gray balance throughout all your steps of CMY grays. And now prepress can separate and proof the file to that same CRPC, not to your specific press, but to the CRPC. So that allows you to repurpose that job to any press that's running to that same standard. It's a lot easier to manage change at that point. So let's take a look at this. What we're seeing here is a representation of print across the 7 different CRPCs. The intent is that they all have a common appearance. The range of the color saturation and the lightness may vary from one of these to the other, but overall, the color balance, the gray balance, is maintained across all of these. So the colors look very similar, just less saturated or more saturated, depending on the range of the printer. This is especially useful if you're working with different kinds of packaging, such as labels, folding carton, shrink materials, all coming together in a package and a display of that product. It's acceptable when the lightness and saturation vary a bit, as long as the overall balance is the same. So for this level of qualification, we're looking at everything. We're looking at CMY, K solids, the RGB overprints, and all of the CMY grays and the black tint ramp. Everything in this screen right now. Those 2 levels are widely used, pretty easy to hit, especially the gray balance one on pretty much any CMYK press. When you get up to this top level of G7 Master Color Space, this is the highest level of conformance, and it does require a bit more work, and this shows the most critical color matching if you can achieve this, because we're actually hitting 1,600 colors within a certain tolerance. Digital printers and presses do have a much easier time to manage this through ICC profiles. Offset, flexo, and other conventional presses are a little bit more difficult, but it can be done. With careful selection of inks, this definitely can be done. I've achieved this on flexo presses running white film, clear film with white ink backers, a variety of different substrates. So it's not just on a paper commercial press type scenario. We generally strive to get to this goal here if possible. If we can't quite hit this level, we can always still fall back and comply to the G7 targeted. But it's always worthwhile to shoot for hitting all these colors as best as possible. Even if you don't quite get there all the way on your conventional press, the attempt to get here is going to provide you much better matching, even if you can't truly comply with the qualification. So the workflow ends up looking like this. The press is going to be run to stable solid ink values targeting a selected CRPC. And if the paper color is more than 3 delta E from that initial standard CRPC, then we can actually use this thing called substrate corrected color aims to adjust those targets to numbers that are appropriate for the paper color you're running. And of course, we'll have a G7 near neutral calibration for the plate curves. For the pre-press work, all the separations are going to be done with those CRPC ICC profiles, and the proofing is going to use the same profiles. Now, on rare occasions, for extremely critical color, pre-press may choose to make a custom ICC profile, but in that scenario, we're still going to try to target the press to the CRPC values so that we have repeatable targets in the press room, and it's less custom. Now, once you've got all the calibrations in place and you got the workflow in place, the press operators do have to maintain process control throughout the run. So they're going to need a color bar. Now for offset, the color bar, of course, is going to go on the lead or tail edge of the form, and flexo, typically we're going to try to run that on both sides if possible. What needs to be in the color bar? Well, the must-haves are CMYK solids, and these need to be in every key on an offset press. The HR patch, which is the highlight range, that's that 50-40-40 patch I was talking about earlier, and that also needs to be in every key across the press. Those 5 patches are what the operator absolutely needs to control that press in each key. Now, overprint patches, that's your red, green, blue, those need to be repeated across the form, but not necessarily in every key. And then your 50% tints, similarly, they don't have to be in every key, but they should be repeated across the form. Now at the top here, we've got a typical color bar, and you'll see that the first 5 patches are those that I described there, the CMYK and the CMY gray balance. And this one also has a tint here. And there's a couple other patches here. One that isn't measured, and then one's the paper. And as we move, we can see that in this bar, it's going to do the CMY solids, a 50% black, and the gray balance patch side by side, so visually you can see if they're failing. And then the next 2 patches are rotated into a couple overprints. And then we repeat that again, and we put in another overprint, another tint, and so on. Those last 2 patches keep rotating out to different of the overprints and tints. Now, those are the must-haves. If you're doing G7, it has to have all of those, because you need to see that HR to see where your gray balance is, and you need to see the 50% tints to know how much adjustment is impacting those tint values as you're making adjustments on the press. The others that you should have, if space allows, is what's called a highlight contrast patch, which is a 25-19-19, and a shadow contrast, which is a 75-66-66. These 2 gray balance patches help you understand how well gray balance is being held in your highlight and shadow regions. And then along with those is the 25 and 75% tint patches that are impacted similarly with those. So these are just oftentimes, especially on offset press, not enough room to run these, but if you can squeeze it into your sequence on your bar, this is definitely beneficial. But again, the must-haves, if you're doing G7, that is critical. If you're not running an HR patch, you're not doing G7. Now, some operators will measure with a handheld instrument. A lot of presses now are coming with scanning systems. If you've got older presses, there are a number of scanning solutions that X-Rite has that can help you monitor this color very quickly. The 2 that I'm showing here will scan those bars at the lead edge or the tail, or actually even in the middle. The exact auto scan that I picture here can actually scan a bar that runs right down the center of the sheet if that's what's required. The IntelliTracks here will do it either end. The AutoScan will do either end or the middle, for that matter. What's special about this, though, is the latest builds of these softwares for these products is actually certified by Idealliance as a G7 process control system. This means that it met a bunch of requirements that provide the operator with actionable information on how to correct their press to hit G7. And some of the key points of that are that, for one, we have what's called our best match feature, which provides a density guidance to help the operator achieve the best LAB match to those CMYK solids we talked about, okay? And it, by the way, it will automatically adjust for the paper color so that if your paper color is shifting throughout the run, it will provide guidance that will compensate for those changes. It also has tools that are going to provide additional guidance to get the CMY balance corrected. As you can see in this graph, we can see these gray patches here. The bars here represent what if the cyan, magenta, or yellow are running too high, too low, or right on the numbers there. So you can see on the left side, these keys, the cyan is running a bit high, and actually everything's running a little bit high there. But as you get into these keys, you'll see that the magenta and yellow are a bit low. So the operator can use that as guidance to adjust those colors up and down just a little bit until they bring that into gray balance compliance. And when they flip between the screens, they can adjust to make sure they stay within tolerance of the solid inks while adjusting to get that gray balance. All these tools drive the adjustments to achieve that G7 compliance across the whole sheet. And you can also generate reports, whether it's a PDF report like you see on the right that has all of the numbers that were targeted for that run and how well you complied, or a simple summary like a sticker on the left side that you can put onto a press sheet that may be retained for future inspection or qualification for customers. Now, for other printing conditions or printing situations where you don't have that color bar at the lead edge with all the keys, you can do spot measurement or color bar scanning with the X-Acto. Now, the X-Acto and ColorCert, software product bars for production QC, they both support measuring each of the individual patches that we talked about for your process control. ColorCert also supports importing of the required patch values from an ICC profile or CGATS files. That's another way of delivering those CRPC data sets that we talked about. And both the hardware of the X-Acto and the software of ColorCert have the ability to do that substrate corrected color aims that we talked about. So what I'm showing here is that in ColorCert, when you pull in an ICC profile, it'll automatically extract from it the CMYK inks, this is the solids and the tints, as well as the red, green, blue overprints and all of those gray balance patches that we talked about, including a gray balance solid here, which is 100% of all three colors. Those are pulled in automatically. So with those tools I just described, the press operator now can run the press to the numbers and assure that you're constantly hitting G7 requirements. Now, G7 is a qualification that's performed annually, and the print suppliers need to confirm that their presses or proofing systems are performing within the G7 pass-fail tolerances. And X-Rite will work with you on renewing your qualification. So upon receiving the proofs and the press sheets, we're going to validate that the results of your sheets are within tolerance. We'll schedule a remote conference to discuss what we have found, and then we'll help submit your forms and the measurement data all to the Idealliance for your requalification to help you maintain that from year to year. So at this point, I think we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Mark. So we do have some time for questions now. If you do have a question that you'd like to ask, feel free to submit one. While we wait for questions to come in, I am going to launch one more polling question. If you would like to speak to an X-Rite representative, or if you'd like to learn more, feel free to answer this question. And I see a few questions right now, so we will answer some of these. I see one question right here. How long does qualification last?
Yeah, so it is an annual renewal on the anniversary of your initial qualification. Oh, they do provide a
Oh,
I'm sorry, I do want to add, they do provide a 3-month grace period if you do run into a scheduling conflict. So we can definitely help you with that.
who on my staff should be involved in the training?
So excellent question. So your pre-press department is going to be key to this, and depending on your particular staffing, that may include or that may be separate from your plate making department. So whoever's working with making proofs, whoever is working with setting up the separation settings for files, like what profiles are you going to use, whoever's responsible for making the plates and the plate curves, those people are going to be key. In some cases, that's one person that does all those things. And in addition to that, of course, we will need to work with your press operators to teach them how to use these new metrics to measure gray balance.
What are the biggest challenges you see when it comes to qualification? Any common issues you see that arise?
No, that's a good question. This is one of the reasons we do have that initial assessment and come in and help you look at your workflow, because there is a wide range of things that can be in place, some issues. Some of the biggest challenges, I guess, like in offset, it's usually pretty straightforward because the inks are, when you're printing on a nice coated offset sheet, it's usually pretty straightforward. I would say that when we get into other print conditions, like say flexo, when you're printing on flexible materials or label materials, sometimes the materials can be a little bit more challenging. But I have so often found that working with your ink company, sometimes it's just a matter of there's a better ink that can be used that can address hitting the colors that we need for our CMYK solids and our overprints. As far as the gray balance goes, as I mentioned earlier, pretty much any process can be gray balanced. The big challenge comes in as we're trying to hit those solids and overprints. But again, cooperation with your ink company usually helps a lot to address that.
We'll take a couple more questions here. Can X-Rite renew my qualification if I use another vendor for the initial qualification?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So we a couple things there. One is that if you wanted additional training, we can always provide additional training to help, due to staff turnover or just simply wanting to go deeper. Because sometimes, when you get the first training, um, you know, it's a lot of information, and you may have not retained it. Some cases, some people want additional training to kind of renew their knowledge level in the process. So that's one thing we can provide. If you're doing a great job and you're feeling comfortable with it and you simply need assistance in renewal, we can definitely help you with that as well. It's a very simple process for us to help you with.
And one final question. What types of costs are involved with G7 qualification?
Okay, so there are two sides of the cost structure on this. There is the costs for the training from X-Rite, with our training and our on-site assistance with that. And that does vary a little bit depending on the complexity of your workflow. In some cases, we may be able to do this in a 2-day on-site training. In some cases, if there's more complexity or more presses that need work with, it may turn into 3 or 4 days, again, depending on your needs. So that part is separate. That's part of your preparation for qualification, basically. And then the other half of the fees that are involved do come from Idealliance, and I don't want to quote their prices because that you can find on their webpage. And when we help you, when we put together a proposal around this, we'll help you. We'll connect you with the most recent prices from them. But the prices from them involve the actual cost for granting the certification and for their final audit of the press measurement results. So, our part of the training and qualification process does involve us measuring to make sure you've got all the right numbers and everything, make sure you hit the targets before we submit it, and then they measure it again. So it does require that two-step check. The consultant or trainer's check of the colors and theirs. So to summarize, there's the X-Rite side, which is training and consulting, and then there's the Idealliance side, which is for the actual certification. And their prices are handled by them, and you'll pay them directly for those.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark. That was the last question we have time for, so this marks the end of our webinar. We will follow up with you if we didn't get time for your question. Again, you will also receive an email with a link to this recording so that you can watch it again. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining this webinar and have a great day.
Thank you all.